The battle should have been over in minutes. The Zalari Dominion had never lost a war. Their fleets were vast, their technology generations ahead of anything humanity could muster. Against them stood a single human admiral, leading a fleet that was hopelessly outnumbered, outgunned, and, according to every strategic model, doomed to fail. The Zalari commanders watched their screens with satisfaction, already predicting the outcome, until everything went wrong. Their warships were thrown into disarray, their formations collapsed, their command structure fractured. Within hours, an entire Zalari battle group, one of the most powerful in the galaxy, was in full retreat. Not because of superior firepower, but because of one man's mind. Admiral Elias Voss had just rewritten the rules of space warfare. But how? How did a species that was considered technologically inferior manage to outmaneuver an empire built on centuries of conquest? How did one admiral, commanding ships that should have been crushed in a direct engagement, manipulate the enemy into defeating itself? To understand the brilliance behind this victory, we need to examine three things: the psychology of warfare, the art of deception, and the human factor, the very thing that alien warlords failed to predict. Because in the end, it wasn't just strategy that won the battle. It was something far more dangerous. Something that made humanity the one species in the galaxy no one could ever truly conquer. The Zalari Dominion, a war machine that knew no defeat. Before we dive into Admiral Voss's masterstroke, let's talk about the enemy. The Zalari Dominion wasn't just a galactic power. It was the Galactic Power. A ruthless empire that had swallowed hundreds of star systems, crushing resistance with cold efficiency. Their fleet operated like a machine, disciplined, synchronized, flawless. Every battle was meticulously calculated, every move determined by centuries of perfected war doctrine. They didn't improvise. They didn't adapt. They didn't need to. Their ships, powered by advanced quantum reactors, moved in perfect formation, using a hive-like coordination system that allowed entire fleets to act as a single entity. Their weapons, based on exotic particle physics, could reduce enemy vessels to vapor in seconds. And their command structure? Flawless. Every Zalari fleet was networked to a centralized battle AI, a system designed to remove inefficiencies, ensuring absolute order in every engagement. On paper, they were unstoppable. And yet, history has shown that the strongest war machines don't always win. In fact, they often fall to something much more dangerous: the unpredictable, the Battle of Terrace Prime, the trap that caught an empire. When the Zalari fleet arrived in the Terrace system, they expected a repeat of every battle before it. The human defenders, numbering barely a third of their forces, were arranged in a predictable defensive posture, their battle stations positioned around the planet like an ancient castle preparing for a siege. The Zalari commanders gave the standard order: advance, overwhelm, eliminate. And that's when everything changed. Instead of engaging in traditional battle formations, the human fleet scattered. Half the ships immediately fled deeper into the system, some even burning hard toward the nearby asteroid belt. Others stayed just long enough to exchange a few volleys before breaking formation and retreating at random angles. To the Zalari, it looked like chaos. Undisciplined, weak, a complete failure of command. But what they didn't know was that every single human vessel was playing its role in a much bigger deception. Step 1. Break the enemy's coordination. The moment the Zalari fleet pursued, their perfect formation began to break apart. Squadrons peeled away to chase retreating human ships, confident in their ability to eliminate them. But every ship they chased was broadcasting false data. Electronic warfare units scrambled their sensors, making it seem as if some vessels were suffering catastrophic failures, while others appeared to be critical targets. The Zalari commanders, following their own rigid doctrines, reacted exactly as expected, splitting their forces to chase what they believed to be easy kills. And that's when Voss struck. Step 2. Control the battlefield. Hidden within the nearby asteroid belt, a second human fleet, previously undetected, came to life. Not warships, but stealth ships. Their job wasn't to engage in combat. It was to cripple the Zalari's greatest strength: their battlefield coordination. Zalari ships communicated through an ultra-high-frequency quantum network, allowing their fleets to function as a single unit. But what happens when that network is flooded with fake commands? Within seconds, the Zalari fleet was receiving contradictory orders. Some ships were told to retreat, others to advance. Defensive formations collapsed. Entire squadrons were left isolated, confused, vulnerable. And then, finally, the killing blow. Step 3. Turn the trap into a massacre. The moment the Zalari fleet was sufficiently scattered, human warships turned around. The very ships they had been chasing were no longer running. They were ambushing. From hidden locations, railguns, plasma lances, and missile batteries opened fire on Zalari command ships, not at random, but surgically. Voss knew exactly how the Zalari fleet operated. He didn't target their firepower. He didn't waste time trying to destroy their battleships. Instead, he went straight for the fleet's neural core, its leadership. One by one, key Zalari flagships, those responsible for relaying battlefield commands, vanished in explosions. Without their centralized coordination, the Zalari lost their greatest advantage. And just like that, a war machine that had never known defeat collapsed into chaos. The remaining Zalari warships, desperate to recover, tried to regroup, but it was too late. Human ships, using a combination of electronic warfare and superior positioning, began systematically tearing them apart. Entire battlecruisers, once thought to be invincible, were left defenseless, easy prey for missile barrages and close-range assaults. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. The Zalari, who had never surrendered, who had built their empire on the belief that retreat was impossible, fled. A species that had never known fear, had just learned what it meant to be hunted. The battle wasn't just a victory, it was a message. The galaxy had just witnessed something unthinkable. A human admiral using nothing but superior strategy and deception to humiliate an empire that had never lost. But this was only the beginning, because what came next would shake the very foundation of galactic warfare. The Zalari fleet was in full retreat, something that had never happened in their history. It wasn't just a tactical withdrawal, it was panic. And that's exactly what Admiral Elias Voss wanted. Because in war, the battle isn't just about who has the bigger fleet, it's about who controls the narrative. And now, for the first time, the Zalari weren't the ones writing history. The aftermath. How one victory became a galactic shockwave. For most of the galaxy, the idea of human victory against the Zalari Dominion was unthinkable. Humanity was a young species, barely a footnote in the records of galactic civilization. They didn't have the industrial power of the Syndicate worlds. They didn't have the scientific advancements of the Varnathi. They certainly didn't have the sheer military dominance of the Zalari. And yet, the impossible had just happened. Word of the battle spread faster than any official reports could contain it. Smuggler networks, intercepted transmissions, and even Zalari deserters carried the same message across the stars. A human fleet had forced the Zalari to flee. Governments and war councils across the galaxy scrambled to verify the claims. How? How could a single human admiral, with inferior technology and fewer ships, dismantle the greatest war machine in the known universe? Some dismissed it as exaggeration. Others believed it was a fluke, perhaps a battlefield accident that had somehow tipped in humanity's favor. But the Zalari knew the truth, and they were terrified. The Dominion had spent centuries establishing itself as an unstoppable force. They had cultivated an aura of absolute superiority, not just in war, but in psychology. Fear was their greatest weapon. Before they even fired a shot, entire planets would surrender. Races would submit to Zalari rule simply to avoid the inevitable slaughter. But now there was a crack in the myth. That's what Voss had truly won, not just a battle, but a symbolic victory. The moment the Zalari turned tail, the galaxy no longer saw them as invincible. The illusion was shattered. And when fear breaks, everything changes. But the war wasn't over yet. The Zalari weren't going to let this humiliation stand. If they had to burn an entire star system to erase this defeat, they would. And Voss knew it. The question was, what came next? The Zalari's response. An empire in crisis back in the Zalari home system. The High War Council convened in secrecy. Their empire had never lost a war, so they didn't even have protocols for what to do when faced with defeat. The council was divided. Some argued for total war. Humanity had to be annihilated immediately before the rest of the galaxy saw them as a real threat. The Dominion could not afford to let a single human planet remain standing. If necessary, they would deploy planetary cleansing weapons and wipe entire systems from existence. Others, however, recognized a different problem. The Dominion's war doctrine was based on efficiency. Their fleets operated like machines, coordinated, overwhelming, unbeatable. But now, they had been outmaneuvered. The Zalari's strength had been turned against them. And worst of all, their enemies had learned something new. The High Council feared a domino effect. If one human fleet could humiliate a Zalari battle group, what if others tried the same tactics? What if other species, long oppressed under Dominion rule, began questioning the Zalari's supremacy? They weren't just dealing with a military loss, they were dealing with the first spark of rebellion. For the first time in their history, the Zalari faced a terrifying reality. They might not be the hunters anymore. They might be the hunted. Admiral Voss's next move. The trap. Inside the trap, while the Zalari were debating their next move, Admiral Voss was already planning his. Because he knew exactly what was coming. The Zalari wouldn't just accept this defeat. They would strike back, and they would do it hard. If they couldn't erase the battle, they would erase him. Voss had studied Zalari war philosophy for years. Their doctrine was built around overwhelming force, destroying an enemy before they could become a threat, and that meant their response would be immediate and massive, which was exactly what he wanted. Instead of retreating to reinforce Earth's defenses, Voss did something unthinkable. He left an opening. Reports were leaked, suggesting that the human fleet was crippled, that their electronic warfare tactics had only worked once and couldn't be replicated, that humanity, despite its victory, was still weak and vulnerable. The message was clear. If the Zalari launched a second invasion, they could wipe out humanity before the war truly started, and the Zalari took the bait. Within weeks, the Dominion gathered a fleet 10 times the size of their original battle group. It wasn't just a military strike, it was a show of force, a declaration to the galaxy that the Zalari still ruled, that their defeat at Terrace Prime had been nothing more than a glitch in an otherwise perfect war machine. They expected an easy slaughter. They didn't realize they were walking straight into the real trap. The ambush that changed galactic warfare. Forever Voss had been preparing for this moment since the battle ended. While the Zalari gathered their forces, he was laying his groundwork. This time, he wouldn't just win a battle, he would destroy their ability to ever fight the same way again. Step 1. Control the battlefield. The Zalari expected to fight in open space, where they could deploy their fleet's full firepower. But Voss had chosen his battleground carefully. A volatile star system filled with electromagnetic storms, debris fields, and sensor-disrupting radiation belts. The perfect place to disrupt an enemy that relied on flawless coordination. Step 2. Cut the head off the snake. Instead of engaging the fleet directly, Voss targeted their command structure. He had developed a new kind of electronic warfare, one specifically designed to mimic Zalari communication signals. And the moment the battle began, every Zalari ship received counterfeit orders. Some were told to retreat, others were given contradictory firing solutions. Entire squadrons lost contact with their command ships. Step 3. Turn their strength into their weakness. The Zalari fleet, in its panic, fired on its own ships. Confused cruisers obliterated Allied forces. Battleships, believing they were under attack from stealth enemies, unleashed devastating weapons into empty space. Within minutes, the Zalari fleet, one of the largest battle groups ever assembled, was in chaos. And then the killing blow. Human warships, hidden within the system's debris field, emerged and struck from all angles. Zalari ships, caught in the crossfire of their own forces, were annihilated before they even realized what was happening. This wasn't just a victory. It was the end of Zalari military supremacy. The galaxy had never witnessed a military collapse of this magnitude. A force once deemed invincible, suddenly fractured by one human admiral's brilliance. Admiral Elias Voss, by manipulating the Zalari's own military strengths, had rendered their greatest advantage, coordination, useless. But this victory wasn't just a tactical one. It was a psychological turning point that had long-lasting effects on the galaxy's power dynamics. The ripples of victory. A galaxy in shock. The Zalari, after the destruction of their flagship and the chaos in the aftermath, retreated into their home system, nursing their wounds. The galaxy watched, held its breath, and waited for the next phase. What would the Dominion do next? They had already established their dominance through fear. Could they recover from this devastating humiliation? And more importantly, how would the rest of the galaxy respond to this new human threat? The galaxy, once fragmented into power centers, now looked at humanity in a completely different light. No longer a small, insignificant race clinging to survival, the Terran Federation had become a power to be reckoned with. But the question remained, was this just a fluke, or was humanity truly capable of fighting back against the oldest and most powerful empire in the galaxy? Humanity's growing military influence was felt far and wide. Even in the depths of the Zalari-controlled systems, whispers of Voss's genius spread. In some corners of the galaxy, this victory sparked revolutions. Subjugated planets, some for centuries, saw this as a beacon of hope. The Zalari, for the first time in millennia, were not the only ones pulling the strings. But the Federation wasn't about to let this newfound power go unchecked. In the wake of Voss's victory, there was a surge in recruitment, a rise in military, technological advancements, and most importantly, a surge in political support for a more aggressive expansion strategy. The threat of the Zalari was still looming large, but for the first time, the humans were the ones on the offensive. Admiral Voss, now regarded as a hero among his people, knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight hadn't even started, yet. He wasn't just fighting to defend Earth, he was fighting for the future of humanity itself. The Zalari may have lost a battle, but they still held a vast, terrifying empire. He had no illusions that this war would be easy. The next steps would be crucial, but the stakes had never been higher. Humanity was now in the fight, not just surviving, but actively shaping its future in a galaxy full of unknowns. The enemy strikes back, preparing for the Zalari counterattack. While the human military was riding high on the wave of victory, the Zalari weren't just licking their wounds in shame. They were plotting their comeback. In the cold halls of the Dominion's military command, they began to put together a counteroffensive that would crush humanity's momentum before it could take root. The Zalari were a race that didn't give up easily. They were notorious for adapting their tactics when necessary, learning, evolving, and ruthlessly applying their superior resources. The defeat had stung, but it had also galvanized them. Their next move would be swift, efficient, and punishing. The Zalari were accustomed to being in control, commanding the battlefield, knowing every maneuver their enemy might make. But now the tables had turned. They were facing an adversary that understood their tactics, an adversary that had outsmarted them on their own turf, and that terrified them. The new plan was simple: overwhelm the humans with sheer power. Humanity had proven they could outmaneuver the Zalari fleet. But could they withstand the full might of the Dominion's war machine? In the shadows of Zalari military command, operatives began constructing a new weapon: the Stormbreaker. A fleet of advanced dreadnoughts designed to obliterate entire planetary systems, armed with weapons far more destructive than anything humanity had faced before. These ships were engineered to break through human defenses and destroy any planet in their path, including Earth. The Dominion knew that the best way to crush the human spirit was through fear, and nothing would terrify humanity more than the annihilation of their homeworld. But what they didn't realize was this: Admiral Elias Voss had anticipated this very move. He was already preparing for the Zalari's next phase. Voss had been watching the Dominion's tactics for years, and he knew that they would come back stronger, faster, and more vengeful than ever. If humanity was to survive this war, they needed to be ready for the ultimate test. A galvanized human response. Building a new fleet as news of the Zalari's plans leaked to humanity, Voss immediately began a massive military buildup. He knew that facing the Stormbreaker fleet head-on with conventional forces would be suicide. The Zalari had too much firepower, and they were prepared to use it. The solution? Humanity needed to do what they did best: innovate. Voss called upon every scientist, engineer, and strategist available to create something new. The human fleet, already more advanced than most of the galaxy's militaries, began undergoing radical transformation. Voss, using his knowledge of Zellery tactics, devised a new kind of ship, the Phoenix-class warships. They would be smaller, faster, and more maneuverable than anything the Zellery had ever seen. Equipped with highly advanced stealth technology and electronic warfare systems, the Phoenix-class ships would be able to slip past Zellery sensors and strike at the heart of their fleet without warning. But the real game-changer was the X-12 reactor, a new power core that could deliver an unprecedented level of energy. With this new reactor, human warships would be able to fire weapons with the power to rival even the Stormbreaker fleet. In the hands of the right commanders, the Phoenix-class ships would be the ultimate weapon, a force that could challenge even the mightiest Zellery dreadnought. The newly restructured human fleet was more than just a military force. It was a symbol, a statement that humanity wasn't just trying to survive anymore. They were now a force to be reckoned with. And it wasn't just the military leading the charge. The entire human race was mobilized. Civilians, scientists, engineers, everyone rallied to the cause. Every factory, every shipyard, every research lab was working around the clock to prepare humanity for the inevitable Zellery onslaught. Voss's gamble, a high-stakes battle that could end it. All as the countdown to the next confrontation with the Zellery began, Voss knew that this would be his most dangerous gamble yet. He wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. He was fighting for humanity's very survival. The war with the Dominion had evolved beyond a simple battle for space. It was now about the future of the galaxy itself. If humanity lost this next battle, the Zellery wouldn't stop at Earth. They would burn everything in their path. But Voss also knew that humanity had one advantage the Zellery could never replicate: the will to survive. And when two fleets clashed again, at the heart of the Zellery home system, it would not just be about tactics. It would be about the heart, the courage, and the unity of a people who had refused to bow to tyranny. The galaxy had become a battleground of ideologies. The Zellery Dominion, once an unshakable force, was now bleeding. Its military shaken, its pride shattered. Humanity, once seen as insignificant, was rising at an alarming pace. And at the center of this galactic storm stood Admiral Elias Voss, the man who had turned the tide against an empire that had ruled for millennia. But as humanity prepared for its greatest battle yet, the question remained: was this a war they could actually win? The Zellery's ultimate plan, erasing humanity from history. The Zellery were not just an empire. They were the architects of domination, the enforcers of order across thousands of worlds. Losing to humanity was not merely a setback, it was an existential crisis. If a species as young as humans could defeat them, what did that say about the Dominion's supremacy? Their power was built on the belief that they were invincible. If that belief crumbled, so would their rule. This was no longer about military pride, it was about survival. The Dominion's rulers, a shadowy council of warlords known as the Primarch Assembly, gathered to devise a response that would ensure their absolute victory. The consensus? Humanity had to be eradicated. Not just defeated in battle, not just conquered, wiped from existence. The Dominion's scientists and strategists proposed a terrifying plan. They would unleash a new kind of weapon, something so destructive that it would make planetary bombardment look primitive. Enter the Exo-Wave Annihilator, a superweapon capable of destabilizing the very fabric of a planet's core, causing an uncontrollable chain reaction that would turn entire worlds into uninhabitable wastelands. This was not just an attack, it was extinction by design. And the first target? Earth. Humanity's countermove. A desperate strategy news of the Zellery's ultimate weapon reached Admiral Voss through deep space intelligence networks. Humanity had always known the Zellery would retaliate, but this was beyond anything they had prepared for. If Earth fell, the war wouldn't just be lost. The entire human species would cease to exist. The Terran Federation's leaders convened in a secret war council. The mood was grim, but Voss remained composed. He knew that they couldn't fight the Dominion in a war of attrition. Humanity simply didn't have the numbers. The only way to survive was to force the Zalari to back down before the Exo-Wave Annihilator was deployed. But how? Voss proposed a strategy that bordered on insanity. Instead of focusing all their efforts on defending Earth, humanity would launch a preemptive strike at the heart of the Zalari Dominion itself, their homeworld, Vel-Karash. It was an unthinkable move. The Zalari homeworld was the most fortified planet in the galaxy, protected by fleets larger than entire armadas. No species had ever dared to attack it. The logic was simple but daring. If humanity could strike deep enough into the Dominion's core systems and threaten Vel-Karash directly, they might force the Zalari to abandon their plans for Earth. It was an all-or-nothing move, a gamble that could end in either humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat. Voss's strategy hinged on a revolutionary new technology: quantum slip-jump drives. These devices, still experimental, would allow human fleets to bypass traditional hyperspace lanes and strike deep into enemy territory in ways no force had ever done before. It was the ultimate wildcard. If it worked, they could launch precision strikes where the Zalari least expected. If it failed, they'd be stranded in hostile space with no escape. The final push, the battle for the galaxy, begins as humanity prepared. For this daring assault, the Zalari were already mobilizing their Stormbreaker fleet, a force of massive dreadnoughts designed to shatter human defenses in a single overwhelming push. The invasion of Earth was imminent. The countdown had begun. But as the Zalari fleet moved into position, something happened that changed the course of the war forever. Voss struck first. Using the new quantum slip-jump technology, a fleet of elite human warships, the Revenant Armada, suddenly appeared inside the Zalari core systems. The attack was surgical and brutal. Communications hubs, military command centers, energy refineries, everything that kept the Dominion running was hit simultaneously. It was as if the Zalari had been caught in a nightmare. For the first time in their long history, they were the ones under siege. Panic spread across the Dominion's leadership. Their war machine was vast, but it had always relied on order, structure, and overwhelming force. Now, they were being thrown into chaos. And in that chaos, humanity thrived. But Voss wasn't done yet. His ultimate goal was Vel-Karash itself, the Zalari homeworld. If he could land even a single decisive blow there, it could force the Dominion into surrender, or at least a truce. The Revenant Armada had done the impossible, pierced the heart of the Zalari Dominion. The once invincible empire was now on its heels, forced into a defensive stance for the first time in its history. Admiral Elias Voss had led humanity to its greatest military success yet. But the war was far from over. In the darkness of deep space, the Zalari had prepared a final gambit, one so catastrophic that even victory might come at a devastating cost. The Zalari's doomsday defense. A trap. Unlike any other Vel-Karash, the homeworld of the Zalari was more than just a planet. It was a fortress. Massive planetary shields covered its atmosphere, reinforced by defense platforms bristling with weapons powerful enough to turn entire fleets to dust. The Revenant Armada wasn't just up against an empire's last line of defense. They were facing the largest concentration of military power in the known galaxy. But the Zalari had one more trick up their sleeve. Intelligence reports intercepted by Terran operatives revealed the existence of something far worse than planetary shields or battleships. The Zalari had constructed a self-sustaining quantum singularity cannon, a doomsday weapon capable of creating an artificial black hole. If the Dominion couldn't win, they would simply erase their enemies from existence. The plan was monstrous. The Zalari weren't just willing to destroy their own homeworld if it meant annihilating humanity's fleet. They were counting on it. By activating the cannon, they could pull the entire system into an inescapable singularity, ensuring that no trace of the human fleet remained. It was a final act of defiance, a last-ditch effort to take their enemies with them into oblivion. The trap was set. All the Zalari had to do was bait Voss's forces into launching a full-scale assault, and then trigger the singularity. Voss's masterstroke, turning the trap against its makers. Admiral Voss studied the situation carefully. He knew the Zalari were desperate, but even he hadn't expected them to go this far. A black hole? That was beyond warfare. It was self-inflicted extinction. But then, a realization hit him. The Zalari were arrogant, predictable in their belief that humanity could never outthink them. That was their greatest weakness. Voss quickly devised a counter-strategy, one that required perfect timing, surgical precision, and a level of deception that no fleet had ever attempted before. Instead of committing to an all-out assault, he split the Revenant Armada into two forces. The first group, consisting of highly maneuverable disruptor ships, would bait the Zalari defenses into activating the quantum singularity cannon prematurely. This would force the Dominion to commit to their doomsday plan before they were ready, creating an unstable singularity rather than a controlled one. Meanwhile, the second group, Voss's strike force, would exploit the chaos and launch a direct infiltration of the planetary command centers, cutting off the Dominion's ability to control the weapon before it reached full activation. If successful, this move wouldn't just prevent the singularity from forming, it would turn the cannon against the Zalari themselves. The battle for Vel Karash, a fight against time itself. The attack began. As planned, the First Fleet moved in, drawing the full firepower of the Zalari's defenses. The Dominion commanders, convinced that they had forced humanity's hand, activated the quantum singularity cannon. That was their fatal mistake. The cannon roared to life, distorting space itself as gravitational waves spiraled outward. But something was wrong. The weapon's core, destabilized by the premature activation, began spiraling out of control. The singularity wasn't forming where the Zalari had intended. It was collapsing in on itself, threatening to consume the weapon's control center before the Dominion could stabilize it. At that precise moment, Voss launched the second phase of his plan. The strike force executed a series of coordinated hyperspace jumps, appearing directly above the control hubs of the Zalari capital. Elite ground teams, using newly developed tactical drop pods, descended straight into the heart of the enemy's command structure. The fall of the Zalari Dominion. The Zalari fought with the desperation of a dying empire, but they were too late. Voss's forces hacked into the singularity cannon systems, locking the Zalari out of their own controls. What had started as the Dominion's ultimate weapon was now a force they could no longer stop. Vel Karash's high command realized the horror of what was happening. The singularity, now uncontrolled, had begun pulling everything into its growing event horizon. Space itself twisted as Zalari warships, their own warships, were drawn into the abyss. Admiral Voss watched from his flagship as the once proud homeworld of the Zalari was consumed by its own arrogance. The planet's defenses, its leadership, its fleets, all of it collapsed into the singularity. The Dominion was finished. The aftermath, a galaxy forever, changed word of Vel Karash's fall spread like wildfire. The remaining Zalari forces, leaderless and fractured, had no choice but to surrender. A species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia had been brought to its knees by a species that they once deemed primitive. Humanity had won, but at what cost? Even as the celebrations began, Admiral Voss remained silent. He knew that this victory would change everything. Humanity had just proven that it was a force to be reckoned with. But with that power came fear. Other alien civilizations, once neutral in the war, now looked at humanity with suspicion and caution. Had they just secured their place in the galaxy? Or painted a target on their backs? One thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Admiral Elias Voss had done the impossible. He had turned the Zalari Dominion's ultimate weapon against itself, crushing an empire that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Vel Karash was gone, swallowed by its own arrogance, and the Zalari fleet lay in ruins. But victory on the battlefield was only half the war. Now came the aftermath, the struggle for power, the scramble for alliances, and the growing fear of humanity's unstoppable rise. The galaxy had changed forever, and not everyone welcomed that change. A broken empire, a dangerous future. With their homeworld obliterated, the surviving Zalari found themselves in chaos. Their once mighty fleets were shattered, their colonies leaderless, and their warriors demoralized. Some Zalari admirals, too proud to surrender, fled into the void, disappearing into uncharted space to regroup in exile. Others, desperate and broken, sought terms with humanity, willing to bend the knee to their former prey rather than face extinction. But not all alien civilizations viewed humanity's victory as a triumph. To many, the fall of the Zalari Dominion was a warning. The humans had proven something terrifying. They were unpredictable, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to win. The Galactic Concordat, an alliance of neutral alien races that had stayed out of the war, now faced a grim decision. Should they welcome humanity as a new power? Or should they move to contain them before it was too late? Admiral Voss understood what was coming. Humanity had won the war, but now they had to survive the peace. The silent war begins, spies, assassins, and betrayals as humanity celebrated. The real battle began in the shadows. The Zalari, even in defeat, were not done fighting. They're surviving. Intelligence networks launched a desperate campaign of assassinations, sabotage, and psychological warfare. They knew they could never match humanity's firepower. But they could undermine its leadership, break its alliances, and sow distrust among its own people. Admiral Voss became the prime target. Without him, the human fleet would lose its guiding hand. The first attempt came just weeks after Vel'Karash fell. A diplomatic summit between humanity and the remnants of the Zalari was ambushed by rogue assassins. A Zalari warlord, feigning surrender, detonated an antimatter device, vaporizing half of the negotiations team in an instant. Voss barely escaped with his life, and he knew this was only the beginning. Human colonies began experiencing mysterious cyber attacks, shutting down defense grids and disabling vital supply chains. Strategic commanders vanished without a trace. Even within the United Earth government, whispers of alien bribery and political manipulation spread like wildfire. The war had simply changed form. Instead of fleets, it was now fought with lies, betrayal, and silent blades in the dark. The fleet, divided. Humanity turns on itself. As fear grew, so did the cracks within humanity itself. Some military leaders demanded total control of the former Zalari territories, believing that humanity should take its place as the new galactic superpower. Others, wary of the growing hostility from neutral civilizations, urged caution, warning that expansion could make humanity the next target of a grand coalition. The biggest debate of all? What to do with the remaining Zalari. Millions of them still lived on scattered colonies and war-torn outposts. Some humans, remembering the centuries of war and suffering the Zalari had inflicted, demanded revenge. A final, merciless purge to ensure the Dominion never rose again. But Voss saw a different future. He understood that while the Zalari had been enemies, not all of them had chosen this war. The destruction of Vel'Karash had already sent a message. What humanity needed now wasn't extermination, but control. Instead of wiping them out, he proposed something radical: absorption. Under his plan, the remaining Zalari would be forced into service under the Terran flag. Their technology, knowledge, and resources would be repurposed to strengthen humanity, ensuring that no enemy, alien or otherwise, would ever challenge them again. But many within his own ranks vehemently opposed the idea. They saw it as treason, a betrayal of everything humanity had fought for. Some officers even threatened mutiny, refusing to serve alongside former enemies. The situation was reaching a breaking point. If humanity turned on itself now, everything they had gained could be lost. The Shadow Fleet, a secret power. Moves in the dark unknown to Voss. There was another force at play, a secret faction working in the background, manipulating events for their own agenda. The Shadow Fleet, an ultra-classified military division that answered to no government, had been operating in the dark for decades. Their belief? That humanity must rule the stars by any means necessary, and that Voss was too soft to finish the job. As the Terran military argued over the fate of the Zalari, the Shadow Fleet took matters into their own hands. They began erasing Zalari colonies, in secret, using experimental weapons to make it look like accidents or natural disasters. They orchestrated false flag attacks, making it seem like the Zalari were still hostile, fueling humanity's rage and pushing them toward complete extermination. And their final move? Eliminating Admiral Voss himself. To them, he was an obstacle, a Leader too strategic to be outplayed in open war, but too compassionate to do what was necessary. If he couldn't be swayed, he would have to be removed. The final battle approaches. Voss had spent his life outthinking his enemies, but now the greatest threat wasn't the Zalari. It was humanity itself. With the Shadow Fleet preparing to launch a coup, Zalari rebels plotting their last stand, and the Galactic Concordat debating whether to unite against humanity before it was too late, the stage was set for a final, decisive confrontation. Everything Voss had built, everything humanity had fought for, now hung in the balance. Would he be able to stop the Shadow Fleet before they turned Earth into the next ruthless empire? Would the Zalari truly submit, or was this only the calm before their final rebellion? And most importantly, would humanity's greatest victory be the very thing that doomed them? Admiral Elias Voss had won countless battles, outmaneuvered entire armadas, and crushed an empire that had ruled the stars for millennia. But this was different. The war was no longer against an alien fleet. It was against shadows, against deception, against enemies hidden within his own ranks. The Shadow Fleet had made their move. The Zalari remnants were preparing one last desperate strike, and the Galactic Concordat was watching, waiting, ready to decide whether humanity was a rising star or a growing threat that needed to be erased. Voss had one final gambit left, one move that would determine humanity's fate. The Shadow Fleet's coup. Humanity turns on itself. The coup began swiftly and without mercy. Key fleet commanders loyal to Voss were assassinated in their own quarters. Silent strikes from unseen hands. Strategic bases were seized as the Shadow Fleet revealed its true power, bringing to light dozens of hidden warships equipped with weapons never seen before. In a chilling broadcast, Admiral Cale Varn, leader of the Shadow Fleet, declared Voss unfit to lead, branding him a traitor for allowing Zalari survivors to remain alive. He called for human supremacy over the galaxy, urging the Terran forces to cast aside diplomacy and take what was rightfully theirs. The stars belong to us. No more compromises, no more mercy. It is time for humanity to rule. The response? Divided. Some within the fleet, still blinded by rage over the Zalari war, rallied behind Varn. Others, still loyal to Voss, refused to be led into a war that would turn all of civilization against humanity. The Terran fleet was fracturing, and if Voss didn't act fast, humanity's greatest victory would end in civil war. The Zalari's last stand, one final betrayal, but Voss had no time to recover, because the Zalari had made their move too. Their remnants had never truly surrendered. While the Shadow Fleet prepared their coup, the Zalari had been rebuilding in the dark, and now, in humanity's moment of weakness, they struck. A fleet of hundreds of warships, their hulls blackened with scavenged technology, emerged from hyperspace above a human colony, one that Voss had personally worked to rebuild. Their message was simple. Humanity had taught them how to be ruthless, and now they would return the favor. Cities burned, defense systems collapsed, and all the while, the Galactic Concordat watched from a distance, still undecided, waiting to see if humanity would crush itself before they even had to intervene. Voss had no choice. He couldn't fight two wars at once. He had to end this, now. Final gambit. Outsmarting two enemies at once. Most commanders would have tried to fight both threats head-on. Voss? He saw the bigger picture. He didn't just need to defeat the Shadow Fleet. He needed to expose them. He sent an encrypted transmission to the Galactic Concordat, detailing every crime the Shadow Fleet had committed, every colony they had wiped out, every false flag attack they had staged to manipulate humanity into war. And then, he leaked it. Not just to the Concordat, but to every military faction, every colony, every surviving Zalari commander. The truth spread like wildfire. The Shadow Fleet had never wanted to protect humanity. They wanted to rule it. As the broadcast reached every fleet, chaos erupted. Admirals who had sided with Varn began questioning their loyalties. Some turned their weapons against their former allies. Others surrendered on the spot. The Shadow Fleet collapsed from within. Not from battle, but from doubt. And then, Voss turned to the Zalari. He opened a direct channel to their fleet, showing them the same evidence. Look at them. They would rather conquer their own people than fight you. You think you need revenge? No. You need a future. The Zalari, bred for war, had never seen mercy from an enemy before, and for the first time, they hesitated. Voss made his final move. Instead of destruction, he offered them power, a deal, an unthinkable one. The Zalari remnants would not be exterminated. Instead, they would be given a place in the new Terran Order, not as subjects, but as allies. Because Voss knew something no one else did. If humanity wanted to survive the coming centuries, it couldn't stand alone. The final battle. The Shadow Fleet's last defiance, Admiral Varn, watching his plan fall apart, made one final desperate attempt. He ordered his remaining warships to glass Earth itself, hoping that if humanity's cradle burned, there would be no choice but to follow his path of total domination. But Voss was ready. With the Zalari now at his side, their combined fleets ambushed the Shadow Fleet mid-warp, intercepting them before they could reach Earth. The battle was short, because Voss had already won before it even began. With half of Varn's forces defecting, his ships were overwhelmed. In a final act of defiance, he activated a self-destruct, refusing to be captured. His ship vanished in a blinding flash, and with it, the last embers of the Shadow Fleet. It was over. A new order. Humanity's place in the stars. The war was won, not with brute force, but with strategy, diplomacy, and outthinking the enemy at every turn. The Galactic Concordat, having witnessed how Voss had chosen unity over destruction, recognized humanity as a true power, not as a threat, but as a leader. The Zalari, once humanity's greatest enemy, became its first true allies. Under Voss's guidance, they helped rebuild what they had once tried to destroy. Warriors without a cause had found one. And humanity? It had secured its place in the galaxy, not through fear, but through strength, intelligence, and the one thing no alien empire had ever mastered: the ability to turn enemies into allies. The legacy of Admiral Voss years later, historians would argue. Was Voss a conqueror, a peacemaker, or simply the greatest tactician to ever live? The truth: he was all of them. And as his fleets patrolled the stars, ensuring that no empire would ever again rise to dominate the weak, one thing was clear. The name Elias Voss would never be forgotten. Because he wasn't just the human who outsmarted an alien fleet. He was the man who changed the course of galactic history. Forever. The Revenant Armada made its final push toward Velkarash. The Dominion, desperate and enraged, recalled the majority of its Stormbreaker fleet from its attack on Earth to defend their homeworld. The trap had worked. Earth was saved, for now, but the battle was far from over. As Voss's fleet entered the heart of the Dominion's territory, they faced something no one had anticipated. The Zalari weren't just defending their homeworld. They had an ace up their sleeve, something far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. And as the final battle loomed, one question echoed across the galaxy. Would this be humanity's greatest triumph, or its final stand?